Watch more programs like this on cable and stream with PCN Select. Subscribe at PCNTV.com. This program has been paid for by the sponsor and does not reflect the views of PCN. To get your program on PCN Fusion and for more information, contact info@PCNTV.com.
Good afternoon. My name is Chad Dion Lassiter. I'm the host of PHRC Speaks, and I'm happy to invite on our show today Regional Director of the Regional Office in Pittsburgh, Lyle Wood, who's been with the PHRC for 31 years, and Assistant Chief Counsel Morgan Williams, who has been with PHRC for 7 years. Good afternoon. How are the two of you today?
Fine.
Good afternoon.
Executive Director Lassiter.
Good to see the two of you. So when we're looking at our topic today is looking at the impact of discrimination on housing. And my first question for you, Morgan, is what is housing discrimination and how common is it? And could you provide a few examples for our viewing audience of such forms of discrimination?
Sure. So housing discrimination is the practice of whether in rental or in sales or in lending, discriminating against or treating a group of individuals differently based on certain classes that the law protects. We call those protected classes. So that is individuals, for instance, on the basis of their race or their sex, their national origin, perhaps their disability or religion. And so an example of that might be a landlord who is unwilling to rent their property to someone because of the color of their skin, or perhaps you have an individual with a disability who needs to have some modifications done to the property to allow that individual to have access to, let's say, the bathroom. So those are practices that could be considered discriminatory. So any entity in Pennsylvania, whether it's an individual or a business who takes actions like this, are committing unlawful discrimination.
Okay, thank you. And Regional Director Wood, why does housing discrimination occur, and what protection do persons experiencing housing discrimination have under the law?
Thank you, Director Lassiter. Housing discrimination takes place for any number of reasons. You have good and bad individuals. You have good and bad landlords and tenants. Many times you have landlords who believe this is my property. I'll do whatever I want to with it. I'll rent to whoever I want to. I don't care if maybe I do end up discriminating. It takes place and happens for again, either a malevolent direct action or sometimes just for a lack of training and understanding of what the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act and the Fair Housing Act under the federal Title VIII requires any housing provider to do and what not to do. And it also goes beyond just, say, a landlord who rents. It can extend into lending and to particularly mortgage lending and financing, terms and conditions of, say, rental or terms and conditions of a mortgage loan or a financing loan. And again, sometimes it's people who don't know. Many times it's people who do know and are aware, but want to, again, set the stage so that they have who they want in their property or who they believe should be entitled for financing or a loan.
Wow, thank you so much. So I want to come back to you, Morgan. What's the impact of housing discrimination on the family unit? And what advice would you give a family who may be afraid to come forward to file a complaint?
Sure. So where we choose to live affects all types of things about our lives. It affects what school districts we're able to send our kids to. It impacts whether we have accessible transportation to get to a job. It impacts what supermarkets are in our neighborhoods, what churches we might, or synagogues, or any religious institution that we might want to go to. So when families are denied opportunities for housing, this can have a significant impact on both their lives currently and the trajectory of how they're able to raise their children. So housing discrimination certainly can have a very significant impact. One of the things that I really love about as an attorney, about the Fair Housing Act and the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act is that these laws are laws with good teeth. So individuals who believe that their rights have been violated can file complaints with agencies like ours, or like some of the local agencies or federal fair housing organizations. And they can truly get a remedy that will help make them whole. And when an individual files with one of these entities, they're protected from retaliation.
Okay.
So they should feel safe to come forward and to exercise their rights.
Okay, and that's very important. So I want to stick with you for this next question as well, Morgan. We know that there are many times where sexual harassment and or sexual coercion occurs in housing. Why is it so underreported, and what can be done to address those landlords who engage in these harmful acts, in your opinion?
Yeah. So sexual harassment's tough. It's, certainly a very tough thing for victims to experience. It's like all discrimination, but it's often done behind closed doors. It's often done to some of our more vulnerable individuals, individuals who perhaps are, having difficulty in their employment, so they don't have a lot of options. So they're otherwise vulnerable. So a lot of times these individuals don't want to come forward of what's going to happen to them. It can be embarrassing for individuals who are victims of sexual assault or harassment, even though there's nothing to be embarrassed by, certainly. And there's concerns that there isn't anything that really is going to be able to be done for the situation. So particularly victims of sexual harassment are more likely to not want to come forward. And there are things, however, particularly under housing laws and under this particular area of the law that we enforce, that can be done to help rectify the situation. We can put barriers between the victim and the aggressor. We can intervene in certain matters so that they won't be harmed any further. And again, we can do a lot with this law to help make people whole, whether it's helping get them reimbursement for having to move out of a property so they can get away from the harasser, whether it's getting certain other kinds of injunctive relief with the landlord and requiring them to institute certain practices that will protect the victim. But there are certainly a lot of things that can be done for victims of discrimination in this area, and we hope that they come forward.
Thank you so much. Regional Director Wood, if you could just share, so Morgan spoke about earlier the impact that housing discrimination has on the family unit and all those things that it can impact: school, supermarkets, recreational centers, libraries, all those things that are necessary for the overall socialization process of families with children. Could you speak to the impact that housing discrimination has on the individual, and maybe even just briefly touch upon what the psychological impact of housing discrimination can have on the individual and the family unit?
Okay. One of the biggest things, of course, being denied an opportunity to be able to reside, to work, to worship, to go to school in the area that you choose. It has a really generational effect on individuals and families in terms of family wealth, particularly the gap between white citizens, African-American citizens, Latino, Latinx citizens, and other minorities. Your house, say if you're talking about say a home where you're paying a mortgage on, you're living there, family ownership, home ownership, we're talking wealth that's passed down through generation. We're talking about on an average, with the most recent statistics I've looked at for the Tax Policy Center, that for a white family, the average median value or net worth is $171,000. For Hispanic Latino families, it's approximately $20,720. For African American families, it's approximately $17,150, and for other minorities, it's $64,620. So we see a huge disparity there, and that's wealth and income is passed down, or wealth is passed down. If I want to leverage my home for a loan to buy other properties from a landlord, or if I want to leverage my home to buy another property, if I want to be able to look at say a credit score that's going to help me with a loan. If I'm going to look at establishing a business, that house is an asset, a tangible asset. It's collateral. So if I go into a bank and say, hey, my average income here is $171,000. There aren't, and all other factors being equal, there aren't a lot of lending institutions who will turn you down. If I'm that same African-American family that goes in with $17,150 in terms of net worth, I may not get that loan. Discrimination aside, that's passed down from generation to generation. And that's why you have such a huge income gap or wealth gap between different protected classes is because of that. That's a systemic type of an issue that's been going on probably since 1619, and through Jim Crow, through Reconstruction, through Jim Crow, even through the present times in terms of predatory lending that still takes place, and the more insidious forms of gentrification I'm sorry.
So speak to briefly the impact psychologically that it may have on an individual and on the family unit. Those disparities and those economic numbers that you just provided, I know for our viewing audience, is really, really great. What about the psychological impact, though, on the individual who faces housing discrimination in the family unit?
It's real. When you cannot provide a safe environment for your family, when you cannot take that employment that's going to afford you greater income because of where you're at. If you're tax based because of redlining, because of other discriminatory systemic practices, keep you from being able to fully exercise your rights as a citizen, that has a detrimental effect on individuals. Depression, anxiety, sometimes antisocial behavior results, from that. There's a definite psychological link between, where you live, your associations that are directly connected to housing, and that has, and especially amongst children. If your children, as they grow, are looking and they're assimilating patterns of behavior, they're assimilating, say, what their environment dictates what they are, and sometimes your environment dictates or has that power to be able to define you as an individual and what you feel is your self-worth. And where your place is in society. So it has a detrimental and devastating impact, particularly on minor and minority children of color.
Thank you so much. Very important. I want to follow up with you, Morgan, on how can someone in the Commonwealth who is hearing and viewing this much needed information on this Sunday, July 5th, for the first time, go about filing a complaint with the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission? So one, how would they go about doing that, Morgan, if you could share with our viewing audience? And then two, what should they expect next once they file that complaint?
Sure. So our viewers certainly can call our housing hotline. I'll provide that number towards the end here. And someone will walk them through filling out a complaint. We can take complaints over the phone. With COVID right now, we don't have too much by the way of walk-in appointments, but once we start, opening back up again a little bit more, people can come in and we'll help them fill out a complaint. But right now we're doing a lot of that over the phone. We can mail information to people that they can fill out and send back to us. Once someone files a complaint, we immediately assign those housing complaints to housing investigators. And those investigators will look to see if the law has been violated. We will reach out to the housing provider to try to see if we can work towards some sort of immediate agreement. And when the individual, because of discrimination, is facing something like eviction, there are times that the PHRC will intervene in those proceedings to make sure that people aren't harmed because of discrimination. So there are a lot of things that we can do, and the first step is to contact us so that we can help them draft a verified complaint. And again, I will give that number out.
Yes, certainly. So the next question is for both of you. I want to start with Lyle and then come back to you, Morgan. We know that fair housing, the Fair Housing Act, is an instrument and tool to remedy injustices and bring about justice. What advice would you have, Regional Director Wood, for those individuals who are coming into the fair housing advocacy space? So a person may just come in and say, hey, look, I'm noble. I believe in trying to attempt to dismantle the structural and systemic racism or oppression that I see in housing. Or a person may come into the context as a person who has experienced some form of housing discrimination, or may just want to trend in the direction of working on housing empowerment, because we know that housing is an essential right for all Americans. What advice would you provide an individual who's trying to come into the space of fair housing, Regional Director Wood? And then we'll go to you, Morgan, with the same question.
Sure.
One of the first things I would advise and caution individuals on is some of us are mercurial in the way we approach things and do things. This is a marathon and not a sprint. We've been fighting this for decades. The Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission was ahead of the curve when they enacted through the legislative process an act that made unlawful discrimination in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania illegal. That was October of 1955. It wasn't until the assassination of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. That the federal government, our wonderful federal partners at HUD and the Congress under Lyndon Johnson enacted Title VIII, the Federal Fair Housing Act. Our act is a living document. It evolves. It's been amended twice in my 31 years with the commission to be more inclusive and adding protected classes under our jurisdiction under the act. So I would first tell them, again, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Secondly, we're not here to dole out retribution, okay, or revenge. We're here basically for justice. To give those individuals who have been harmed and are aggrieved because of unlawful discrimination or unlawful discriminatory practices that have taken place. We have been able to do that. We are neutral, we are impartial, and we basically are looking at justice and enforcing the act. Not every case that comes in is going to actually go the way that complainant wants. We're here, we are impartial. We deal with facts. We deal with facts that eventually, if we do find that there is probable cause to credit that allegation of discrimination to the complainant, that are court worthy, and we will prosecute. That's ultimately that you switch hats, and once we find cause, we become prosecutors, and we are here to prosecute, enforce the act, get that person, justice, and hopefully a trier of fact or a judge in a court will make that person whole for the discrimination that they have been subjected to. And so those are some of the things. Be resolute, be patient, be professional. You represent
Wow.
the best of the Commonwealth. You represent the best of what we're supposed to be. You're here to be able to afford that individual their day in court, their rights under the law and justice. That's what we enforce.
Thank you so much. And Morgan, same question to you. What advice would you give someone coming into the fair housing space?
Sure. So there are a lot of things that people who are interested in helping people and interested in access to justice issues can do with respect to fair housing. Certainly, social work backgrounds are great. Backgrounds involving law enforcement can be helpful for folks who are interested in investigating these kinds of issues. You have to obviously be passionate about people. For attorneys that are interested, I'll speak specifically to that. This is a great area to practice in. There are not a lot of attorneys who practice in fair housing. And both the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act and the Federal Fair Housing Act are great tools to work with. And part of what's included in those statutes is the ability to get attorney's fees. So you can, pursue even smaller dollar value cases for individuals and still be able to, run your law business. So it's one of the few statutes that have those types of provisions in them. And the PHRC is always looking for, good people and, prospective attorneys. We take externs. So PHRC is, I think, as good of a place as any to get started in the fair housing arena.
Thank you so much. Before we wrap up, for our viewing audience, please look us up on www.phrc.pa.gov for just a lot of pertinent information to keep you abreast of all the work that we're doing to ensure that people in our great Commonwealth are not discriminated against. I do want to do a one-word association, and I want to come back to you, Morgan, and then I'll go to Regional Director Wood. One word that comes to mind when you hear the phrase fair housing.
Justice. Justice.
Okay, justice. One word, Regional Director Wood, when you hear the word fair housing.
Freedom.
Freedom, okay. Now I want to come back to you, Morgan, and just for our viewing audience, really, really quick, share with our viewing audience, why is it that you still remain so committed to this work?
Yeah. Well, there is a lot of work that still needs to be done. And I love the fact that I can go home at the end of the day having done something meaningful each and every day. And there's plenty of room for others to join in. So.
Great. Same question for you, Lyle. 31 years with the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. Why is it that you still remain committed, like Morgan and everyone that we work with wholeheartedly, to this work?
We still have work to do. Despite the promise of equal protection under the law, despite the promise of equality and equity, the forces are still out there that would deny individual citizens those rights. It evolves. We have to evolve with it. We are the enforcers. We are the guardians of those rights and those freedoms. So as long as injustice is there, I'll be here, God willing, and you'll be here so that we can afford those citizens their due process should they be discriminated against.
We want to thank our viewing audience for joining us here on PHRC Speaks with our esteemed guest, Regional Director of the Pittsburgh Regional Office, Lyle Wood, and our brilliant Assistant Chief Counsel, who's at the Pittsburgh Regional Office as well, Morgan Williams. Please join us next on July 19th, PHRC Speaks. Have a great Sunday.
This program has been paid for by the sponsor and does not reflect the views of PCN. To get your program on PCN Fusion and for more information, contact info@pcntv.com.